Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Fostering Quality Schools. We have what it takes to transform your school. I want to check out our four-part series. It's on our resource page on www.fosteringqualityschools.com. We have a lot of free resources to support an instructional theory of action to accelerate learning for all students. And I want to introduce Dr. Mark Blitz from the Wisconsin Center for Education Products. They have a great uh, feedback system called CALL. It's the Comprehensive Assessment of Leadership for Learning, and it's a school-wide leadership assessment and feedback system to support professional growth, leadership development, and school improvement planning. So, Mark, please say hi to everybody and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Joe. Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be talking with you today. As Joe said, I'm Mark Blitz. I'm the project director for Call, as well as other versions of Call, including long distance Call, which we'll talk about today. As Joe said, I'm at the Wisconsin Center for Education Products and Services, coming to you from Madison, Wisconsin. Been working in education for pretty much all my professional life. And, like everyone else, making sense of this new world in education and doing what we can to support you all.
I mean, Mark, our world has shifted, and quite honestly, it feels a little out of control. And for all of us, and we talked about this. Our rhythm, our routines have been turned upside down. People that I speak to completely feel disenfranchised, and they feel disengaged from their leadership teams, their teachers, their students, and families. Is that a concern that you've had as well with people that you know and talk to in education?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, the words I hear from people is that we're just in survival mode.
Yeah.
Um, and that's just in the world of education, let alone everything else going on in the world. So like you said, it's disheartening to hear that. And I think what's um, disheartening really is that schools are in survival mode. But we hope that's there's still going to be that focus on quality instruction and enhanced student learning. As hard as that might be, but that's still the charge of all schools, and it's something that I know that schools are up to the task once they can get their footing. But this has just been a whirlwind, as you've said, over the past few months, and any way that they can kind of get a firm sense of what's happening to help them along the way, I think would kind of make them feel less in survival mode and more in um, being more focused on being effective and progressing towards improvement.
Yeah, I was just speaking to an administrator the other day, and they were telling me they just feel like they can start talking about instruction, and just started to go to the school just to see a couple of classrooms. When we think about March 15th, the world shut down, and when you talk about survival mode, fear creeps in, and the fear of COVID, the fear of results of an economic shutdown, the impact definitely broke our rhythms, our routines, our structures, and this produces fear that affects us as human beings. Um, and when you have
Mhm.
that, it really impacts our limbic system, where we go into fight, flight, or freeze, and it shuts down our abilities really to think as leaders. And um, when you think about that, what do we do as leaders? When we're survival mode, we move into command and control because we're afraid. So we got to be careful not to buy into that lie that we need to have all the answers. And great leaders absolutely know they need to have all the answers. But for leadership right now, it's never been so challenging to be a school leader right now. And leadership is really determined by two things: the decisions you make and the influence you have. And some of the things that I think leaders really need to understand is understand your current reality to help you get through this and come out of survival mode, and seek a long-term vision and make strategic bets by strengthening your team, showing empathy, and having intentional curiosity. And I think what you designed over the summer with long distance call really helps leaders do that, get them quick information so they can understand their current reality, where they are with remote learning, hybrid learning model, so they can seek a long-term vision and make strategic bets for the rest of the school year, because we're all concerned about learning loss. So, I'd love to have you just go through the system for our school leaders, and kind of talk to us about the design, And this doesn't measure the practices of a leader. It measures the practices that we know are strong in the distributed leadership model, um, for strong leadership practices in a school. So I'm going to let you take it and just show everybody what you designed for the long distance calls feedback system.
All right, great. Thanks, Joe. I want to just touch on one thing before I get going. It's something you said about operating in fear and what causes fear and how stifling it is. It's really hard to make any progress when you are in that state of fear. And what causes fear is the unknown. It's hard to move forward with any confidence if you don't know what's coming next. And that's not just in schools, that's in, again, right now in the society and the world in which we live. So any way we can get in more information and have a firmer sense of what is to come, or or just get a sense of what we know, that helps give us more information and hopefully helps alleviate that fear and helps us kind of get over those hurdles.
Exactly.
So long distance call, let's get into what this actually is. So we're going to start with this idea, or this question is, what is long distance call? So it's derived from the evidence-based comprehensive assessment of leadership for learning that Joe talked about, or CALL. Just very briefly on this, CALL started as a federally funded research project at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And over time, it's turned from a research project to a tool that's being used across the country in various schools. And it's been really helpful for schools to gather data to support school-wide leadership. So in a nutshell, CALL is a formative assessment online, always has been online, and feedback system designed to measure school-wide distributed leadership. So distributed leadership is one of the core principles of what is CALL and long distance call. But just to give you an idea what this is, we're looking at leadership across the school. We are looking at this in terms of progress, formative in nature, and providing targeted data in the feedback system. So given that's what CALL is, go back into our original question of what is long distance call. It's a version of CALL that exists in this new environment, school-wide leadership assessment and feedback system for remote teaching and learning. So we talked about distributed leadership and that being one of the core principles of this work, and I want to just briefly explain why that's so important in this work. Because with individual leadership, if you only focus on that one individual person, whether we're talking about schools that are operating in person, hybrid, or virtual, if you only focused on one individual person, that principal, you'd be missing a lot of what else is happening throughout the school. And that actually, if we wanted to assess and support leaders in school, we should look at what various people in the building are doing, because leadership is the result of various people in the school who are taking on leadership responsibilities, who are interacting with one another. It's not just the principal who's doing every single leadership task. Oftentimes, the principal is acting more like an orchestra conductor who's coordinating the work in the school, making sure everything's effective, efficient, harmonious, to go with the metaphor here. So this idea, this concept of distributed leadership is really the foundation behind the work of CALL and long distance call. We're looking at the work of school-wide leaders and not just one individual person. That's important because we want to focus on the work. So with long distance call and call in general, here's what we get when we operate with this in schools. So it begins with a multi-source survey. So in any given school, we would have all the teachers and administrators and instructional support staff and student support staff participating and responding to questions on leadership. But the survey, while it's focused on leadership tasks, has a little bit different of approach because we're not looking at any one individual person. We want to know what's being done and how effective is that work. And then as a result, when the data comes back in the online formative feedback system, school leaders and coaches and district leaders are going to get targeted data to support school improvement initiatives. So that's really the key characteristics for call. With long distance call, when we look at now how this is going to benefit schools within the remote teaching and learning environment, here are some things we want to think about. So we have this opportunity to assess opportunities for growth in the remote teaching and learning environment. So that's a unique opportunity, obviously. We also have this opportunity within long distance call itself to compare data from the in-person and online school environments. A really interesting opportunity here to look and see how practices have changed from depending on the school context, and see where there are opportunities for growth, where there are opportunities to maintain enhanced practices, or try to hold on to practices that worked in person and transfer them over into the virtual environment. It's also a good opportunity to collect data for school improvement during a time in which data collection is challenging. A lot of times we rely on student tests, student learning outcomes. We may not have access to those data going forward. So this is an opportunity though to collect data. The long distance call survey activity can be completed anywhere at any time. It's all online. It can be done as a set activity where people are given time to do it, or during an open window of time where they're given, say, 2 weeks, because they can begin the survey, log out, log back in as they need to. And again, given where people are, literally, they can take the survey anywhere they have a computer and internet connection. And then the other benefit is that school leaders can look at the data and the results right away, and then get right into looking at their strengths and improvement needs in a school. So that's the key characteristics for long distance call.
Hey,
And I
Mark,
want, oh,
just
sure.
before you move on, I just wanted to say, that we're broadcasting this the last week of October. We're a couple of weeks away from Thanksgiving. Most schools are finishing up or just finished their first quarter. So this is really good time for schools to collect some needed data on how their instructional model is actually working, and their leadership practices throughout the school. If they're fully remote or a hybrid type of model, it's a great time to really look and get some immediate data so you can start doing some long-term planning for the rest of the school year.
Absolutely. This is around the time to start collecting that data, especially if you are in that virtual school environment. We've had a couple months now, and going back into the spring too, to have established some routines, some practices, and it's a good opportunity now to gather that data, to look at how this might be useful for the rest of the school year, no matter what context you end up being in, whether in person or online. So I want to show a couple of sample survey items that you would see, but actually the first one is not from long distance call at all. I want to be able to show you the difference between an individual-based approach to inquiry for school improvement and an approach that uses a distributed leadership lens. So in a traditional approach to leadership assessment, we might see a question like this: how effective is the principal in implementing professional development activities for remote teaching and learning? So if we're talking about leadership, oftentimes we focus on the principal. And you can see from this question that we are focusing and asking about the principal. And then we can see that the response options are traditional response options, a traditional rating scale, from not effective to extremely effective. The challenge here, though, is that it may not be the principal, especially in this new environment where we might be giving other responsibilities to other people. It may not be the principal who's doing this work. It may be an assistant principal, a teacher leader, a district leader. But we don't know from school to school who's doing what specific task. And really, that matters less to us than looking at the effectiveness of those practices specifically. So removing the individual from this inquiry approach, let's look at how we want to ask about this construct, this idea of PD activities within long distance call. So on this survey, here's how we want to ask about that area of work. This question asks, which of the following best describes how well additional professional development activities were implemented to support remote teaching and learning? So now you can see that the focus is on the actual PD activities themselves rather than the person, because that's really what we want to know about. How effective are these activities? And the response options are potential examples of what's happening in the school. So now we're actually getting data on the work, and we're giving people who are taking the survey, the teachers, staff, administrators, an opportunity to reflect on that work. And because the question is focused on specific practices, the data that comes out of it is going to be action oriented, and we can even act on this, a change practice based on the results from just one question alone. So that's what we mean by distributed leadership, and that's what we mean by practice-based and focusing on the work.
I mean, I
So
think that
Yeah.
Mark, I wanted to say and re-emphasize to people that that's what's great about this survey is that it's practice based, and it really does give you information on the leadership practices that you'll need in a school, especially with remote and hybrid learning, and it gives you actionable information. And all the work that we've done with schools, that was the power of the data.
Yeah, and Joe, I think when we look at the how works in action, um, I know you've been working with schools for a few years now, so you have firsthand experience of how this data can be useful for them, and so being able to see how this can be used in the virtual environment as well.
Hmm.
Um, I know you're looking forward to that as well, that opportunity to work with schools. So one more idea before we get into the actual long distance call application so you can see how it works. I want to think about school improvement and professional development planning as well. I know it might be hard for schools to think about this kind of work right now, but now it's more important than ever to think about school improvement because this is what we need to be doing. We need to think about how can we improve, how can we move past survival mode and really think about progress and improvement, supporting teachers, supporting students. For school improvement planning, oftentimes we see a strong focus on outcomes, right? Here's where we are with our third grade reading scores, and here's where we want to be. And then we have the people who are responsible for meeting those outcomes, the teachers, support staff, administrators. But there's a lot of things that go on between the people and the outcomes that we don't necessarily focus on in our school improvement planning or professional development planning. And that would be the things that people do, the various tasks and activities and routines, practices, programs, processes. We really should look at what people do because we are talking about planning. We're talking about school improvement planning. So what do we want to do differently? So it's important that we actually look at and assess what people do in a real formative way, not summative, not to try and grade people or determine if someone is effective or not, but really try to identify where are key priorities right now. More specifically, we want to look at what leaders are doing, and not just formal leaders. We see leaders across the school in informal positions as well doing a lot of this work. And that's how we approach our work with call and long distance call. So we're going to head over to this website in just a moment. We could take a look at long distance call in action. We invite you to visit the call site anytime and learn more. You can check out a sample survey, a sample feedback report, and we're going to go there ourselves right now. All right, so now I know we're still recording. I'm going to go over to the website in just a moment, but how
I
are
mean,
you
the
thinking?
power. I think it's going great. And I think the
Okay.
power of when people get to see the data dashboard is the power of the actionable data that they
Right,
can look at the practices, um, and really identify some high leverage priorities that they can act on right away. What's also
right,
powerful about it, Mark will show it to you, is when you look at your data, there's a feedback loop too. So there's feedback and resources that go with the practices that you can use as a school as well. We always found that really helpful in our work with schools too. Around family engagement, or if it's around your professional learning communities, the collaboration and planning.
Okay, here's our website, leadershipforlearning.org. You can go here to learn about all things call. If you go to leadershipforlearning.org and scroll down a little bit, you can learn specifically about long distance call and can learn more. And you can check out a sample survey and a sample feedback report. So let's go to that. Let's actually show you what it looks like when schools are using long distance call and the kind of data that they get and how they can leverage that for their school improvement work. So we're in the call dashboard. Right after the survey has been administered to all the survey takers, we can just simply go to our dashboard and click on view reports. And here we are. Here's our report for our sample school, our long distance call sample school. So let's take a look at some things here. So you can see how things are organized up at the top. We want to start with our wins, our areas of strength. We also obviously need to focus on some improvement needs. We also have our view by domain, and then our top 10, bottom 10, which is going to be very specific practices that are highly rated and not highly rated, our lowest rated items across the whole long distance call survey. But I'm going to start with view by domain, just so you can see what we are looking at within long distance call. Our main domains, which are going to be numbered there on the left, okay? And then the subdomains with our subcategories within each domain. You can see there's a lot of information here, and one of the things we want to do with this feedback system is not overwhelm people. So we're just showing you here what is being measured, but we're not necessarily going to look at every single data point, and we don't want people to look at every single data point. So for any of these domains, we can click on view subdomains, it'll open it up, and we can look at each of these subdomains within domain 3, supporting innovative teaching practices, for example, promoting effective teaching practices, conducting formative assessments of student learning, providing relevant formative feedback for teachers. And that's just in domain 3. And here's where long distance call, I think, is going to be unique. Aside from measuring school-wide leadership practices and using that distributed leadership lens to do so, we also grouped various practices that exist in any of those previous 5 domains. We grouped them into these types of comparison subdomains, looking at practices as they pertain to school climate and instructional leadership, but practices that we ask about both in the in-person and remote teaching and learning environment, so we can do a comparison. So if we click on a view subdomain, we can see the practices when we were in person around school climate, how we as a school were doing. And if we scroll down one below, we can see the same practices, but within the remote teaching and learning environment and what that looks like. And we can see that our school rating has a 3.2 in the remote teaching environment versus when we were in person was at around almost 3.5, which is a somewhat significant difference there. I should say that all the data that you're seeing here, the quantitative data, is on a 5-point scale. So it's important just to note that as a comparison point. Ultimately, what we want to do, though, is not look at every single data point. What we want to try and do is use the system here to guide us. So certainly with areas of strength, we can see where we might want to celebrate some of our wins. These are subdomains, all right, groups of questions that have been pulled out from any of the other domains within long distance call. So we can just start with these and really focus on where we're strong and just show the staff that these are some things that we're doing quite well, even though we think of ourselves as being in survival mode. And we can also then look at improvement needs and see where are our opportunities for growth. We don't want to think of this as shaming ourselves and looking at like, oh, we're really doing a disservice to our students and our teachers and our families. Not at all. We're looking for ways to improve, or if we always have a constant growth mindset, we are going to do right by all our community members, the students, the families, the teachers, other school community members at large. So looking at where there are opportunities for growth, like in 5.1, leveraging resources for student learning, or 4.1, implementing relevant and effective professional learning opportunities, 3.2, promoting effective teaching practices. Well, let's take a look at that one. And what we want to ultimately do is click on and view all items in this area. So if we do that, it's going to take us to the next page. And 3.2, promoting effective teaching practices. And now we can look at each question within this subdomain, right? Differentiating instruction in the virtual school environment. So you get the construct, what this question's about. We get the item rating, again, 5-point scale. We also have the average rating for all schools who've ever answered this question. That's the average for them. So we can kind of see where we are in comparison. We get the question itself, right? We're asking teachers about how they conduct differentiated instruction within a virtual school environment. And we got our response options and the distribution of response options. and then this histogram that shows that distribution as well. So we see an opportunity, perhaps we could see, well, we're doing okay here for teachers, but how can we make progress even further? How can we get more toward this optimal practice about conferring with students individually, creating assignments that allow students with different learning styles, abilities, to do the same kind of activities at appropriate paces. We could see how, if to what extent we're making this in a school a priority by seeing how often school leaders schedule time for teachers to discuss differentiated instruction strategies in a virtual environment. And here's an interesting distribution where we might have 25% of people saying that this happens somewhat frequently and infrequently, and 35% saying this happens actually somewhat frequently. What's the difference here? Where are we seeing this type of divergence in experience? And it's a good conversation to have to try and understand that. Why are some teachers having different experiences than others? As you can see, there's a lot of different practices that are being assessed here. We don't want everyone to focus on every single data point. That's just too much. What we want to be able to do is target specific areas that are an opportunity for growth. And to target those and to say, here's a practice we want to focus on right now. This is going to be our area of focus for the next 2-3 weeks. And once we can perhaps enhance that practice, we can move on to the next one. So we have a lot of opportunities shown here. As a matter of fact, let's go back to view by domain very quickly and just show you one of the opportunities you have with long distance call. I showed down at the bottom here how we have these domains where we can do some comparison practices. And if we look at comparison practices for school climate and we click on view subdomains, and again, we saw that there's that difference between the in-person and the virtual or remote teaching and learning environment around school climate. Well, let's just take a look and see why that is. So we can see here that adult relationship to students in person is one of the key practices identified in this area. So let's click on that. So this is a question that's asking about adult relationships to students in person in the school. And we're asking about what percentage of the following students in your school had a meaningful personal relationship with a school staff member when you are in person. That's really an important part of student learning. Students being able to trust the adults in the school, feeling comfortable working with adults in the school, knowing that they have support. And for this school, in the in-person environment, we have a decent high number of students that teachers and staff felt have a good relationship with adults in the school, with staff. If we go back and see, well, what does this look like in the virtual environment? And we go down to this subdomain, remote teaching and learning practice for school climate, and we view all items in this area, let's go see what that looks like if in the virtual environment. So here, adult relationships to students in the virtual environment, we can see the same question, but we're asking about meaningful personal relationships, but again, in virtual, and you can see here that the percentages are much lower, as might be expected, that we're seeing that there's a gap there, that we might have lost those connections with students. And you might say, well, yeah, of course, but this just shows us in numbers. It shows us in data, and it confirms perhaps our assumptions that this is happening. And it gives us that sense of either urgency or priority to take on this opportunity and see how do we then cultivate more meaningful relationships, even within the virtual environment, because of how critical that is within this new school environment that we're operating in. Lots of data to look at, and we invite you to take a look at an online report on the website. And I think the last thing I want to show you is that it's important to note that when school leaders are using this, when we design call and long distance call, we know how overwhelming it can be when you get a lot of data. And then even with what we hope is a user-friendly system like long distance call, we know that they can say, okay, well, what do I do now? Okay, you've shown me where I have opportunities for growth. You've shown me where we really need to be focusing our attention. Yes, I can look at the individual items and say, let's try and get here instead of there. But what do I do first? Well, one thing you can do is contact Fostering Quality Schools and work with them as part of their service to support you in your data analysis and the developing an action plan going forward. But even with that, you can still click on view feedback within the system here for any of these subdomains. So here, promoting effective teaching practices. If this is an area that we want to focus on in our work around school improvement within either the remote or in-school environment, let's click on view feedback. And you will see that the system offers some strategies and suggestions for improvement for this specific area, promoting effective teaching practices. We start with some questions to consider about what's happening in this area, just for reflection. And then we offer some suggestions, some strategies, some things that maybe schools are doing or maybe they're not doing. In any sense, it really gets, hopefully gets school leaders to think about what could we be doing differently. And for a lot of these, we're often linked to the work that Fostering Quality Schools are doing. And you can simply click on that and you can get some pretty great resources, including their website here, and as well as work specifically around, specifically around how to improve in that specific area for promoting effective teaching practices. So that in a nutshell, I know it's a bit of a whirlwind, is how schools use long distance calls to support their work in the virtual school environment. And I think one of the things to think about is we don't know, of course, how long schools are going to be operating in this capacity. It could be month to month. It could be the rest of the year. In any case, it's just important to have information. Even when schools go back to the in-person, you could say, well, here's what we were doing in the virtual environment in some of these cases, and it worked, right? We might be spending more time individually conferring with students. We might have been doing more collaboration with teachers, or we really slipped when we were trying to have meaningful relationships with students, or we used to not really think about teachers' mental well-being when we were in school, but when we moved to virtual, it became a top priority. Let's keep it as a top priority when we're back in person. So having data now, it's always going to be helpful in the future, no matter where we are in the school. And it addresses that fear. It addresses the unknown by giving us more information and helping us to make more informed decisions in our leadership work. All right, so what do you say, Joe?
So I just want to remind what we really lost with the shutdowns is, good teaching is an intimate experience. And we're at our best when we can stand close to students and examine their work and give them hugs and high fives and have the private conversations. And we lost that with the COVID. And I think it's real important. This is a great, I've used call for a number of years with schools. And leadership is determined by two things that you need to do. One's decisions you make and the influence that you have. This gives you great data on how well you're doing with your leadership practices that you need to function with in school, and to help you understand your current reality, and then seek a long-term and short-term vision and strategies to improve things. So if you're interested in more information around long distance call, Melissa and I and Mark worked with schools for a number of years throughout with this survey. And Melissa and I are available to help principals and their leadership teams go through the data to determine high leverage action points and items to help you improve. We're all worried about learning loss this year. And we were just worried about the spring learning loss, but now we're starting to really think about, well, is it going to be a year and a half? We don't know what the winter holds for us. So all you need to do is just go on our webpage and just schedule a consult, and we'll be happy to meet with you and talk to you a little bit more about how you can use long distance call. It's something that you can do right now and get data back immediately, so you can start thinking about some high leverage points for your school. So I just want to thank you, Mark, for coming on and showing us long distance call. We're really excited about it, and that we can offer this for schools. And please go to our website and schedule a consult, and we'll be happy to talk to you more about it. So thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.